Hey guys, I'm Stacy and welcome back to the Retro Time Machine. Today I'm going to show you how to make the perfect marshmallow, and also I'm going to show you what not to do. Now I'm going to be perfectly honest with you guys. I did not plan to spend an entire Saturday making 2 batches of marshmallows. A lot of the recipes that I found to try this were really vague or way too specific. And on our first batch that me and my friend made together, we weren't really sure if we did it right. So I tried to save it and I made the marshmallow loaf. Now, bear with me, I don't even know if this is gonna turn out right. The funny thing is that when we went and we made that second batch, it turned out just like this one did. I kind of realized maybe we just wasted an entire day like doing so much research on marshmallows, which is why I made this video so you don't have to. I'm gonna be honest, I'm gonna be real about it. But I think hopefully this one will turn out well. And I know that the other ones did, the little hard ones, so I know that that recipe does work, but we used pretty much the same recipe. I will tell you definitely what I did that I think might have messed this one up, but if this turns out perfect, then okay, it was fine. So we'll see.
For this recipe, you are gonna need some unflavored gelatin, light corn syrup, cornstarch, sugar, salt, flavoring and food coloring of choice, and you're also going to need a pretty large saucepan and a baking sheet. Now this step is optional. I am taking some raspberries and putting them in the dehydrator, but you can buy dehydrated or freeze-dried fruit at most grocery stores. I think it's a good touch. To start off your marshmallow mixture, you're going to take half a cup of cooled cold water and go ahead and bloom 2 tablespoons plus 1.5 teaspoons of gelatin. The recipe that worked called for a whole cup of this light corn syrup, and then you're also going to add in 1.5 cups of sugar with a pinch of salt and half a cup of water. This is such a satisfying ingredient to pour. At this point, you're going to want to go ahead and combine all of your ingredients in your saucepan and start to turn the heat on. You want this to completely dissolve clear, and then once it does, you're going to do this little shimmy motion to stir it. You're not going to use a spoon or anything else, just shimmy. Put the lid on to kind of trap in some of that moisture and help that sugar cook down. In your mixing bowl, preferably with whisk attachments, you're going to plop your gelatin in there so that way when the sugar is done, you can just dump it in.
So we've all heard that old saying that a watched pot never boils, and I never quite understood that until I was trying to make marshmallows. It is such a weird, delicate process when you are working with sugar mixtures, any sort of candy making. A few degree of temperature can make or break a recipe, and that's what we learned while making 2 batches of marshmallows, is that our successful batch we took up to 140, and it felt like it took forever for it to get anywhere close. And then once it was there, I was like, oh my gosh, like we were really watching that pot. And our other recipe we took up to like 245, maybe a little bit higher. And it made all the difference in the type of sugar crystals that wind up forming for your marshmallows. So as long and as painstaking as it seemed, a lot of recipes were like, oh, it should take like 10 minutes for it to boil. Realistically, we timed it and we checked these recipes that we found online, and it took 25, at least with an electric stove, for it to reach 140. Now I highly recommend, if you're gonna make these, you need to get one of these little guys. So it is a digital thermometer probe. I use this for cooking meat especially, or on my smoker, but it's also great for when you're doing things with sugar, which is very delicate. But when you can get it right, it's perfect. When you get it wrong, it can turn into a really big mess.
One thing that most recipes were really vague about is they're like, oh, just kind of boil it. By the time it reaches 240, it is a roaring, aggressive boil. And I was not prepared for that. I was super glad that I had my thermometer to check, but that was really deceptive in most recipes. Another thing that I learned is that before you add your hot sugar mixture, you probably want to go ahead and dump in your food flavoring and food coloring, especially if they have a high alcohol or oil content, because it will totally deflate your marshmallow peaks. So here you can see everything is looking great. We're starting to get air into our sugar mixture. Another really cool tip is to add an ice pack to the outside of the bowl to help to cool that glass down so everything gets really fluffy and big. Here you can see those beautiful peaks, and also you will see when everything starts to go wrong, we start to add our flavoring in, and you can see with the vanilla, because it's an alcohol-based extract usually, nothing really happened. But as soon as I started adding the rose, which I believe is an oil-based extract, the peaks just started to deflate. If you think about things like meringue, you don't want any oil in a mixture where you're trying to get air involved. And it's just so sad that everything was going so good for the most part until this point. It smelled absolutely amazing also, but you can see everything's starting to sink down. I was like, panic mode, let's turn it up even higher. And that did nothing. It was really, this just all sort of go downhill here, even in the beginning, probably because we got the sugar too high. There was no real saving it.
Almost looks like that stuff, the marshmallow fluff. Yeah, that's hard.
At this point, we had realized something had gone horribly, horribly wrong. Thick and shiny and glossy. We just spent what felt like an eternity on this, so we tried to save it. We read online that you could add egg whites, and that just turned it into an even soupier, gloopier, wetter mixture. So I was not willing to give up. I was like, let's just go ahead and put our food coloring in. I think you could probably also add that at the beginning with the gelatin. And then that didn't work, so I was like, let me just fold in some mini marshmallows and turn this into some sort of weird gelatin marshmallow cake. I don't know. I was not going to give up. So I gave it a good shot. On our second batch, we decided to opt for the hand mixer with smaller whisk-like attachments. It still looks pretty similar to the first one, so we were not convinced if we just hadn't totally made 2 giant batches of marshmallows, but you could still tell there was a slight difference. And we went ahead and poured it into a baking pan that was greased lightly with coconut oil.
Yeah, the first one you could just call Grandma's perfume.
Okay, so our marshmallows have been resting now for at least 6 hours. I let mine sit overnight. As you can see from our big goopy marshmallow loaf, that it is no longer a big goopy mess. So we are gonna get back to this here in just a second. Right now we're gonna work on the smaller marshmallows that I put into this pan. I wanted them to be nice and thin so we could use some cookie cutters and cut them into heart shapes. And also these raspberries that we dehydrated, I'm gonna crush those up and use them as a topping. Now these took way longer than I thought. I mean, if you think about the moisture content in a raspberry, it took like almost 24 hours, but absolutely worth the wait. And honestly, I didn't have to do much work. So we're gonna crush those up and put them into a little dish. And then once we take our cut shapes of the marshmallows, we're gonna dip them into the raspberries. And then in another bowl, we are gonna take some powdered sugar and a little bit of cornstarch. And then we're gonna dust those so they're not super sticky. But I'm so excited. All right, so we've got a little setup here. we are going to move our dusting pan over for just a second, and we are going to focus on these raspberries. Now the cool thing is that they are totally dried out. This is so cool. I love that sound that they make. I don't know if you can hear this. I'll get a little close there. Here, I'll do one more. Isn't that cool? So we're just gonna crush all these up. So for our powdered sugar and cornstarch mixture, I'm gonna do mostly powdered sugar, just a sprinkle of the cornstarch. I'm just gonna kind of eyeball it. I know that I can make quite a bit because we're also gonna be slicing up that loaf, and it's going to need a little bit of powdering, probably more than these other ones will. That looks good enough. Let me grab a little whisk. So keep in mind, this will probably start to get really, really, really sticky and messy. So you're probably gonna need to powder sugar your tools and your hands. So having more is probably always better, and it might get a little messy. So just be okay with that and trust the process. Okay, so we've got one of our hearts cut out. I'm just gonna kind of bloop it. Right, there we go. Really sticky. Take my little heart and move it right into my raspberry mixture. Okay, looking cool. And then I'm going to put that into there. I need to start to powder my hands and my tools. Make sure you get the sides. All right. So we've got one of our hearts down, but a dozen more to go.
I was absolutely not impressed with how the first one turned out, so I started to try different techniques and see if I could get something to stick, literally.
Okay, so what I'm noticing after doing a few of these little hearts is that in order to get the raspberry on there and then powdered sugar, you're losing some of that color and pigment. What I noticed on almost accident is that one of the kind of smoother, not so tacky sides fell into the raspberry mixture. And it worked, and it didn't need, the top doesn't need a lot of powdering. So what I'm gonna do, wish me luck, is I'm just gonna sprinkle my raspberries onto the top of my marshmallow and kind of press them in. That way they don't need as much of the powdered sugar mixture to keep it from getting sticky. And I can really then powder the bottom and not worry. I'm gonna lightly powder my hands and press these in. Okay, so I think that is gonna work much better.
Now keep in mind, you guys could do these in any shape, color, or flavor. I like the heart ones for Valentine's Day, or I also serve them at one of our poker parties as a cute little heart-shaped dessert. If you are using a cookie cutter, don't waste any of those scraps. Just dice them up into little pieces and roll them around in that powdered sugar mixture.
I greased this gelatin mold because I know how to make jello. I know that, and marshmallows are gelatin, but different. I greased it with coconut oil, and I'm going to try to release my marshmallow loaf with hot water like I would a gelatin, and hopefully we'll move on to the next step and everything will be perfect. But I'll also show you if it doesn't work so you know that I'm a real person who tries really hard. And also, again, sometimes on the internet there's just not the right information, which is why I do enjoy making these videos, and I hope you guys enjoy them as well. So we're gonna pop this guy into some warm water, release that coconut oil that is holding this marshmallow loaf in this pan, and we're gonna transfer it over to the prep station with our powdered sugar and slice it up, hopefully. And now for the big reveal. It definitely turned out to be a big pink disaster. So what I can tell is the outside set fine. So maybe if I had put this in a flatter sheet, it would have done something better. But I think there's a couple things that went wrong. So in a lot of the recipes that I looked up, I used in this one a recipe that called for only a 1/4 cup of corn syrup, whereas in the successful one it was a whole cup, and also the temperature that they said to cook the sugar mixture to was very high. So I think, and I can tell by tasting it, that you can actually almost taste the sugar crystals in the marshmallow mixture, which is not what you want. You want to be light and airy and fluffy. And this is like wet and gooey and crunchy, which is not a marshmallow. So I tried really hard to save this one, but you know, sometimes it doesn't work out, and sometimes you spend a Saturday making marshmallows with your friend. So, also in this recipe I used a little bit, maybe too much of the rose flavoring. It definitely tastes a little soapy. So you live and you learn, and I did it so you don't have to. We're definitely gonna have to throw this one away. I couldn't save it.
The texture just wasn't right on these. The sugar was too high, too much of an oil flavoring. I did let it sit out for another day to see if anything would change, and it still was wet on the inside and crunchy on the outside. Not good.
I really hope you guys learned something from today's video. I know I sure did. And like always, take care and God bless.